Hey guys, tonight, we journey back not just to any past, but to a world so damp, so squishy, and so unexpectedly organized that you'll be questioning your entire understanding of mud. You're standing barefoot in a strange place. Lake Texcoco, smack in the heart of what would one day become Mexico City. The air smells like warm earth and something faintly fishy, like wet reeds mixed with the ghosts of amphibians. Mist clings low to the water, but don't get too comfy. You're about to step into a lake where the ground isn't solid. The cities float. And oh yeah, you probably wouldn't survive this environment for more than a few hours without local help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your city and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who else is up late, chasing strange history. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward each step, sinking slightly into squelching silt. This isn't your average postcard perfect lake. Lake Texcoco is shallow, just a few meters deep in most parts, and brackish, a strange hybrid of fresh and salty water. It's not exactly welcoming. The edges are crusted with mineral salt. If your phone existed, it would definitely not survive this humidity. And yet, as you peer out across the shimmering expanse, something extraordinary catches your eye: lush greenery rising right out of the water. But wait, that's not land. Those are islands. Fields floating rectangles of corn stalks and flowering plants anchored right in the middle of the lake. Welcome to the Chinampa Zone. Here's the mind-bending thing: you're in the middle of a swamp that's been turned into a city-sized salad bar. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs were the original inventors of this technique, or if they adopted it from earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Xochimilca. Either way, by the time the Aztecs got serious about expansion, these floating gardens weren't just clever, they were essential. It wasn't just one or two gardens either. You're looking at thousands of them, all neatly laid out in grids like a patchwork quilt over water. There are canals between them like water streets, and each island is bordered by little reed walls or anchored by trees. And guess what? They're not actually floating, not like rafts. They're built up from the lake bed, carefully layered with sediment, plants, and mud, until they form spongy but stable plots of land. Think of it like Earth's most sustainable lasagna. You crouch beside one of the chinampas. There's a kind of eerie silence here, broken only by birdsong and the soft slap of canoe paddles. These gardens grow everything: maize beans, chili peppers, tomatoes, squash, and even flowers used for rituals. All of this from a lake that, by most standards, should be useless. Oh, and here's a fun fringe tidbit. Aztec farmers sometimes used human urine to boost plant growth. Yeah. So if you feel the need to pee while visiting a chinampa, just know you might be contributing to the cause. That's real circular agriculture. As you wobble deeper into this lake world, the scale of it hits you. This isn't some rustic community garden with 3 old ladies and a pumpkin. This is urban agriculture turned empire grade. Some estimates suggest that these chinampas could yield 7 harvests a year, compared to the 2 or 3 max you'd get from European farms at the time. It's like the Aztecs discovered a cheat code in Farmville, and no one else got the memo. To keep these plots from floating away or eroding, the farmers planted ahuejote trees, a type of willow, along the edges. Their roots anchored the beds in place and helped soak up excess water. You reach out and touch one of them, its bark cool and damp. Birds nest in its upper branches, while bugs hum lazily below. It's a living fence, a marker of borders in a world without hard lines. And it's not just agriculture going on here. You catch glimpses of fishermen pulling up nets, women tending flowers, a kid balancing a basket of chilies like it's a tray of precious gems. Life is happening out here on mud and water without dry land. Even the water matters. Aztec engineers built dikes and sluices to manage the freshwater and saltwater mix. One famous dike, attributed to Nezahualcóyotl poet king and hydraulic mastermind, helped keep the southern part of the lake, where the chinampas flourished, sweet and drinkable, while the northern section stayed salty. You might laugh, but that's elite-level plumbing for the 1400s. One small historical fact that's often overlooked. These chinampas were considered sacred spaces. Before planting, farmers would sometimes offer blood, usually from their own ears or tongues, to bless the earth. Forget Miracle-Gro. This was divine agriculture. The line between farming and worship blurred. And now, as the sun lowers over the marsh and a reddish hue sets fire to the water's surface, you get it. This isn't just innovation, it's adaptation turned into art. The Aztecs didn't just build cities on water. They made the water part of the city. You step back, shake some mud off your sandal, and glance around. So far, so good. But don't get too confident. This floating dream is only getting stranger from here. You stand there ankle deep in cool muck and begin to understand what the Aztecs figured out. Long before rooftops sprouted solar panels and we started composting. Like it's a lifestyle, they didn't just survive in this soggy mess. They engineered it into one of the most efficient farming systems in the world. You take a few careful steps forward, half expecting to fall through what looks like land but isn't, and then you see it, the chinampa, up close, in full operation. It's not floating like a raft, and yet it doesn't feel like solid earth either. It's something in between, a patch of semi-land tethered to the lakebed by layers of mud sediment reeds and willow stakes. Kind of like nature's lasagna, if the main ingredients were dirt, decay, and genius. You crouch again, fingers sinking into the soil. It's thick black and surprisingly cool, rich with organic matter, dead plants, lake muck, decomposed fish parts, and in a few cases, let's just say animal contributions. And yes, that includes the occasional human output. Aztec recycling wasn't for the faint of heart. These chinampas, often misnamed floating gardens, are anything but accidental. Every square meter is calculated. One plot might be 30 meters long, about 100 feet, and 2.5 meters wide, roughly 8 feet, bordered by canals just wide enough for a canoe to pass. You can practically hear the gentle swoosh of water against mud. It's oddly calming. Now here's the kicker. These plots weren't just dumped into the water willy-nilly. No, each one was methodically staked out, using wooden posts tied together with reed mats and filled with alternating layers of lake muck and vegetation. The Aztecs discovered that this layering acted like a sponge, holding nutrients and moisture. In other words, these were hydroponic systems before hydroponics was even a word. As you run your hand along one of the corners, you spot a young man in a tunic using a sharpened digging stick, an ancient tool called a koa. He jabs it into the soft earth, twisting slightly to aerate the soil. He's not rushing. Each movement is deliberate, almost meditative. You can almost hear him whispering to the corn plants, asking them to grow strong and sweet. Mainstream historians agree that this system outperformed most European agricultural setups at the time. Why? Because it worked with nature, not against it. The canals kept everything moist. The nutrient-rich mud meant minimal need for fertilizers and pest control. Oh, just a quick splash of chili water to the leaves, Aztec-style pesticide, spicy and effective. You spot one of the more curious aspects of chinampa life, a scarecrow, but not the kind you'd expect. This one's carved from wood, painted with red lines, and wearing a feathered headdress, a miniature god of maize, perhaps. Some scholars argue these weren't just to scare birds. They might have served as ritual guardians, spiritual bouncers for the crops. Historians still argue whether these carvings had religious functions, or were just culturally acceptable garden decor. Either way, the corn seems to like them. You walk along the canal's edge, careful not to slip, and watch a family paddle by in a dugout canoe. In the middle sits a child holding a cage with a bright green parrot, a luxury pet even back then. The canoe dips slightly as they turn, revealing bundles of herbs and squash. It's a commute, sure, but it's also a floating farmer's market on the go. You pass another chinampa, where a woman plucks Chenpoxokitl vibrant orange marigolds that glow like miniature suns. These aren't just for looks. They'll be used in rituals, their pungent scent believed to attract the spirits of the dead. You want to ask how often she replants, but realize you wouldn't understand her nahuatl anyway. Still, her gentle humming says plenty. And then, unexpectedly, you spot a man standing waist deep in a canal covered head to toe in wet algae. He's scooping the green stuff into baskets, and no, it's not punishment. It's spirulina or tequitlatl, one of the earliest forms of cultivated protein. The Aztecs were eating sustainable superfoods centuries before. Whole Foods slapped a price tag on it. Quirky fact. They even used dried spirulina cakes as travel rations, light portable, and reportedly with a flavor somewhere between lake and regret. Not exactly Doritos, but it kept the army marching. The air here buzzes not with noise, but with productivity. These plots are alive not just with crops, but with birds, frogs, dragonflies, and even the occasional mole popping up through the dirt. You're not walking through a farm. You're inside a living machine, humming with ecological symbiosis. Your eyes lift toward the horizon. In the distance, these chinampas go on forever, disappearing into a haze. It's not a garden anymore. It's starting to look like the foundation of a city. From a bird's eye view, this must look like green veins running through a blue body. It's no wonder that the Spanish centuries later would be baffled by what they found. But we're not there yet. You're still here, surrounded by mud and method. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows change and something else becomes clear. This system isn't just effective, it's also beautiful. There's symmetry, geometry, logic. Each canal is like a street and each plot a block. It's almost like you're standing on a blueprint, a floating urban plan in disguise. And as you breathe in the moist, earthy air, you realize the Aztecs didn't just cheat nature. They collaborated with it, manipulated it gently, and ended up with a farming system so efficient and so sustainable it makes modern agriculture look clumsy by comparison. You glance down again at your muddy feet, half expecting your sneakers to dissolve. You laugh softly to yourself. If you had to grow your own food like this, you'd probably be dead by now. But not these gardeners. These were pros. You wake early the next morning, if you can even call it morning, when there's no real roof over your head, and the lake air is thick with fog. It clings to your skin, damp and sticky, but not unpleasant. The ground is still squishy as always, and your feet are coated in a layer of soft mud that refuses to dry. As you stretch and stand near the edge of the chinampa, you watch an old man hammering something into the lake bed a few plots over. He's driving a wooden stake deep into the muck with surprising rhythm. Thud. Pause. Thud. Curious, you shuffle over. Turns out you've wandered into a construction zone Aztec style. These aren't random piles of reeds and mud slapped together with hope and twine. No, building a chinampa is a serious business, and it starts with careful placement. The wooden stakes this man is hammering, usually made from willow or ahuejote trees, mark the corners of the rectangle to be built. Think of them like the measuring tape and concrete forms of an ancient surveyor's toolkit. But it's more than geometry. As you kneel beside one of the fresh markers, you notice bundles of reeds tied with maguey fibers laid in neat rows. The Aztecs used these as the base, kind of like laying down insulation. Then came the layering lake, mud, decaying plant matter, more reeds, more mud. Repeat. Like an overachieving compost heap. There's an odd satisfaction in watching the layers go down. The mud oozes like chocolate cake batter, and you swear the reeds make a soft crunching sound under the weight. You dig your fingers into the top layer, moist, warm, surprisingly sweet smelling. The stuff is biologically alive, teeming with invisible microbes, turning muck into miracle grow. Historians still argue whether there was a specific divine formula for the layer count. Some say 7 layers, others insist on 9. Superstition science. Probably both, but the real kicker. These layers made the plots so productive that once matured chinampas could produce yields almost continuously, sometimes 7 crops per year. In a world without chemical fertilizers, that's borderline magic. You help the workers press bundles of reeds into place, and as you do, one of them drops a small clay idol into the foundation. He doesn't say much, just gives a half smile and covers it with mud. Later, you'll learn this is no accident. Bearing offerings was part of the process. A ritual seeding, a spiritual down payment. Sometimes it was maize kernels, sometimes jade beads, and in darker moments, maybe a bit of blood. No pressure, though. You wipe your hands and look up to see a priest nearby. He's not wearing flashy robes, just simple woven cloth and a necklace of bones, but his presence is commanding. He kneels at the edge of the new chinampa, murmuring a prayer in Nahuatl. You don't catch much, but one word keeps repeating Tlaltecpac on the earth. Even here, ankle-deep in water, the Aztecs thought of this as being on the earth, not above it. Then comes something a little weirder. The priest sprinkles powdered chili and crushed cochineal beetles onto the new mud. It turns the soil bright red in patches, like the garden bled a little. A quirky fringe tidbit. This wasn't just symbolism. Chili powder discouraged pests, and cochineal, which produces a brilliant crimson dye, was a marker of value. It's like they were saying, this dirt is royalty. As the day heats up, the workers step aside, letting the new chinampa settle. It'll need a few weeks to stabilize before planting begins, but already the edges are secured with young willow saplings. These trees will grow quickly, locking the plot in place, their thirsty roots slurping up excess water and anchoring the whole island down. You wander to an older chinampa nearby, one that's clearly been used for years. The earth is firmer, drier at the top, and it smells like healthy compost, earthy, alive, ready. Someone's laid out shallow furrows for planting. Squash vines stretch lazily across the surface, and maize stalks rise tall like green spears. It's oddly geometrical. You can tell where each crop starts and ends with a precision you didn't expect. And then you find the twist magic stakes. Every few rows, there's a small carved stick pressed into the ground symbols etched along its sides. You crouch down to study them. Are they calendars? Moon phases? Fertility prayers? Scholars still argue what these meant. Some think they marked crop rotations. Others believe they warded off agricultural demons. Maybe both. Or maybe the Aztecs just liked to mix good farming with a little flair. You sit down for a breather on the edge of a chinampa, letting your legs dangle into the canal. The water laps at your ankles, warm and silky. Dragonflies hover lazily nearby, and a frog lets out a throaty blurp. This place, for all its planning, still feels wild, balanced, alive. A young girl paddles by in a canoe, singing a song in Nahuatl about the maize gods. Her boat is filled with bundles of freshly cut reeds. As she passes, she waves, and you can't help but smile. She probably helped build a chinampa this week. Or 5. Kids here grow up learning how to shape their world from mud sticks and sky. It's hard not to feel a little envious. You look around at the trees planted as anchors, the crops growing in perfect rows, the rhythm of paddles on water, and you realize you're witnessing a fusion of architecture, agriculture, and spirituality. And somehow it all floats. Not like a boat, not like a raft, but like an idea too good to sink. You're getting the hang of it now. The balance, the rhythm, the squish. Every step along the chinampa paths feels more confident, like you're starting to earn your muddy boots, figuratively speaking. since you're barefoot and squelching through history with damp toes and questionable dignity. Today, you're not just watching things grow, you're moving. You climb into a slim, flat-bottomed canoe, a Akali, the Aztec version of Uber. Minus the surge pricing, and take the oar yourself. The wood is smooth from use, the handle warm from the morning sun. With a push and a practiced twist of the wrist, you're gliding forward, the canal water parting gently around your tiny boat. You're now officially part of the traffic system, Aztec edition. Canoes bump softly against each other as traders, farmers, and priests go about their day. You pass a boat full of flowers, another carrying baskets of maize, and one suspiciously low in the water with what looks like a full pig. It's a bustling scene, like Venice had a fever dream and woke up wearing obsidian jewelry. You paddle past chinampas bursting with life. There's maize, of course, the sacred grain. It stands proud in stiff rows of it, fluttering in the breeze like soldiers at attention. Then squash vines curl along the edges, their wide leaves soaking up the sun. Beans creep up makeshift poles, reaching like eager hands toward the sky. And then there's the fringe crop amaranth. You lean over to get a better look. Tiny reddish-purple flowers with seeds so fine they look like dust. Amaranth was sacred, not just food, but fuel for rituals, even sometimes mixed with honey and blood to make figurines for festivals. You bite your tongue. Probably best not to ask for the recipe. Each plot seems dedicated to a different god's favorite crop. Some have tiny shrines built into the corners, little rock towers with feathers and dried chili garlands. One has a stone frog that's been worn smooth by weather and offerings. You drift past it slowly, the frog's blank stare matching your own as you wonder whether it's judging your rowing skills. It probably is. Suddenly, you come upon a calendar shrine nestled between two chinampas. This isn't tourist decor. It's serious business. Painted glyphs mark the sacred days for planting, harvesting, and leaving the land fallow. You hop out of the canoe and step onto the island, careful not to crush any squash, and study the symbols. One looks like a bundle of reeds, another like a jaguar paw. Historians still debate the precise meaning of each glyph, but here the farmers nod knowingly. The calendar tells them when to dig, when to water, when to sing to the crops. Yes, sing. You stumble into a midday ritual in progress. A few farmers gathered in a circle softly, chanting a tune that feels more like a heartbeat than a melody. Their voices are low, rhythmic, and oddly relaxing. You close your eyes and sway, almost forgetting you're covered in 3 types of mud and possibly an insect or two. And here's the weird part: the crops seem to respond. The breeze shifts. The maize stalks rustle like they're whispering back. One of the farmers notices you watching and leans over with a wink. The gods like music, he says, as if that explains everything. Maybe it does. Back on your boat, you pass a floating nursery. Tiny canoes filled with seedlings, gently bobbing on the water. The farmers use them to start plants early before transplanting them into the chinampas. It's mobile agriculture centuries before food trucks became a thing. You spot young tomatoes, chili peppers, and even cacao saplings, though those will have to be traded uphill to the warmer zones eventually. You pause near a family plot where 3 generations are working side by side. The grandfather inspects the maize tassels, the mother carefully removes pests by hand, and the child splashes water onto the roots with a carved gourd ladle. It's efficient, intimate, and weirdly beautiful. You almost feel bad for your houseplants back home. And here's another neat fringe fact: Aztec farmers used floating mats of algae as fertilizer. They'd scoop up the green goop, dry it out, and crumble it like ancient Miracle Grow. Not only did it nourish the soil, but it also helped bind the top layers, keeping everything from washing away. Genius, gross, and effective. You mentally give it a 5-star review. As you turn your boat down another canal, something catches your eye. A small idol, half submerged in water moss, creeping up its sides. It's a figure of Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. His goggle eyes peer upward, as if daring the sky to keep behaving. You paddle past reverently. After all, if Tlaloc gets cranky, these floating fields become a soggy nightmare. You rest a moment beneath a willow tree growing at the edge of a plot. Its long branches trail the water, casting a soft green shadow over your canoe. You close your eyes and listen the croak of frogs, the swish of paddles, and the distant hum of a song still drifting across the lake. And it hits you. This isn't just farming. It's a full symphony of land, water, people, and gods. It's agriculture, as choreography, rituals, and calendars. Gods and gourds, sweat and sap, all dancing to the same rhythm. You drift there a while longer, letting the canoe bob gently. You could get used to this, floating from plot to plot, helping harvest by day, offering chili to the rain gods by night. But don't get too relaxed. You're about to learn what happens when these gardens aren't just for crops. Because when the Aztecs really got bold, they didn't just grow food here. They started growing cities. The canoe bumps softly against a reed wall, and you step out not onto a muddy patch of farmland, but onto something that feels different, firmer, wider. Someone's swept the path here. There's a carefully laid grid of flat stones pressed into the chinampa surface. You pause and blink, because now you're not just in a floating garden. You're in a neighborhood. Wait, how did this happen? You look around. There's a house, a real one, with walls of wattle and daub, a thatched roof, and smoke curling from a clay chimney. Just beyond it, another. And another. You keep walking, marveling at how seamlessly this farm has turned into a village. The chinampas have expanded, merged, and transformed. What started as agriculture has become architecture. Someone passes by carrying a basket of steaming tamales. A child chases a chicken through a flower bed. You hear a woman humming as she shapes clay into bowls beside a canal. And it hits you. This isn't just a cluster of homes built near chinampas. This is a community on chinampas. The Aztecs didn't draw a line between field and street. They didn't have to. The soil was stable, the trees held everything in place, and the canals doubled as sidewalks. Over time, they began building homes and public spaces right on these engineered islands. You're literally walking through a floating suburb. The structure you approach next surprises you. It's a temple, small but ornate. Shells-decorated steps and a painted mural of a maize god, possibly Centiodal, smiles down at you with golden teeth. Inside, a few people kneel beside incense burners, their prayers rising in smoke toward the reed-covered roof. This isn't some makeshift shack. It's a sacred space right in the middle of what used to be a vegetable patch. Historians still debate whether larger temples and public buildings were built on actual reclaimed lake bed or enlarged chinampas stabilized with stone. Either way, the engineering blur between floating garden and city block is undeniable. You've just crossed the invisible line. You wander through a small marketplace, your sandals brushing against smooth planks laid across the soil to form a walkway. The stalls are shaded by maguey fiber canopies, and baskets overflow with chili peppers, beans, avocados, and a suspiciously good-looking pile of what might be fried grasshoppers. You're not ready for that level of culinary commitment, so you nod politely and move on. Here's the thing, these chinampa cities weren't temporary. People lived here, worshipped here, held council meetings here, even settled petty disputes over who trampled whose squash vines. Imagine your neighborhood built over a lake, your backyard, a canoe dock, and your basement just more garden. And the plots didn't grow randomly, they were zoned. There were residential chinampas, temple chinampas, even commercial ones. Some housed pottery workshops, others had weaving stations. A few were nothing but flower farms, their bright petals destined for ceremonies and garlands. You step onto one now and are overwhelmed by scent, tempo alxocitl wild orchids, and something sweet you can't identify. Then there's the sound of a bell. Except it's not quite a bell. It's a hollowed gourd, struck by a stick and echoing across the canals. It's a call to gather. You follow a small group of residents to a large rectangular platform that seems sturdier than most chinampas. A civic space, perhaps. An elder stands there preparing to speak. He addresses the crowd with stories of past harvests, praises the gods, and reminds people to respect their neighbors' plot lines, because even in paradise, boundary disputes exist. Quirky tidbit. In some areas, chinampas were rented out like ancient Airbnb farmland. Nobles or temple administrators owned large plots and allowed families to farm or live on them in exchange for tribute, usually maize labor or handmade goods. So yes, even in a mud-based city, landlords were a thing. Yay. As you sit on the edge of a platform soaking in the ambiance, someone offers you a drink, pulque, a slightly fermented agave beverage that tastes like a halfway point between yogurt and regret. You sit politely and try not to make a face. The group laughs softly. They know. A young woman next to you explains in broken Nahuatl and hand gestures how her family's chinampa has passed down through generations, how every corner of it was shaped by her ancestors' hands. You look at her calloused fingers and realize she's not just repeating a story, she's part of it. At this point, you're wondering where the mainland even is. The truth is, these chinampas stretched for miles, some connected directly to larger causeways that led to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital itself. Others remained on the outskirts, their own mini-communities dotting the lake like emerald stepping stones. You squint across the shimmering water. In the distance, you can just make out the silhouette of Tenochtitlan, rising like a mirage, its towers and temples built on a massive series of connected islands. But that's another story. For now, you're here in the quiet genius of the city beneath the city. As you walk back toward your canoe, the sun begins to set. The light glints off the water, turning it gold. You watch a dog chase a dragonfly across a canal. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a flute, slow meandering, and a little off-key. It's perfect. And you realize something: these aren't floating gardens anymore. They're floating lives. You step into the canoe and push off once more. The water ripples behind you, and the Chinampa city fades into the dusk. But don't get too dreamy. Ahead lies the true machinery behind this miracle, the people who made it all work, one muddy layer at a time. The sky is that deep indigo color, just before full darkness settles in, and the air has cooled slightly, though the lake mist still carries that warm, sweet scent of soil and reed. You paddle quietly now, your arms aching in the best possible way. Around you, small fires have been lit on the banks of the Chinampas, soft glows flickering beside homes and altars. The city on water feels timeless, sacred. But behind the ritual chants and flowering pathways, you start to wonder who actually made all this happen. Turns out you're about to meet them. You pull up alongside a chinampa, not marked by crops or shrines, but by the sound of digging. Rhythmic, deep, relentless. A team of workers covered in lake mud and sweat pass baskets of sediment hand to hand, dumping the stuff onto a rising platform. These aren't casual gardeners with feathered headdresses. These are engineers, ditch diggers, and dirt sculptors with the strength of oxen and the patience of monks. You step onto the chinampa and immediately sink up to your ankles in fresh mud. One of the workers grins and offers you a shovel made from carved wood and obsidian. Because yes, even in construction, the Aztecs brought a little blade flare. You take it awkwardly, slice a chunk of lake bed, and manage to get more muck on your tunic than in the basket. They laugh but kindly take over. They're rebuilding a plot that started to sink a normal part of Chinampa life. These things aren't static. They're alive. And like anything alive, they need maintenance. Sediment has to be replenished. Canals dredged, edges rewoven with reeds, roots trimmed, trees pruned. Without constant upkeep, the whole thing reverts back to swamp. One man shows you how they reinforce the corners, ramming in new willow stakes and packing them with woven mats to hold the shape. You'd think it's crude, but then you see him pull out a measuring string tied between stakes. Everything's aligned to exact specifications: the width of the canal, the angle of the slope. Even the height of the planting bed is calibrated for water saturation. This is precision agriculture, and no one here's got a clipboard. Historians still argue whether these engineers worked under central planners or operated in smaller family-based cooperatives. Some believe the state assigned labor teams based on calendar cycles. Others think the chinampa zones operated semi-autonomously. Whatever the case, the logistics were intense. There were canal inspectors. You meet one now, a serious woman in a turquoise tunic who checks water flow and cleanliness. She points to a blockage downstream, shakes her head, and disappears to find the culprits. Aztec civil code was clear: neglecting your canal meant fines or worse, public scolding. And nobody wants to be the one who flooded their neighbor's chili patch. You pass a shaded area where men are weaving reed fences called petlotl to use as canal walls. These aren't decorative. They hold the earth in place, prevent erosion, and allow for controlled water flow. Every fence is tied with agave fiber, every corner inspected. You wonder how often one person messed up and let half a chinampa float away. Probably only once. A bit further on, you hear a different kind of digging. You round a bend to see a group of workers building a new canal. They're removing sludge, carving out straight paths between plots. It's backbreaking labor shovels, baskets wading waist-deep in water and bugs. But it's also strategic. The canals are angled to allow water circulation and easy canoe traffic. They're the veins of this entire green body. And just when you think the work is purely practical, someone pulls out a carved gourd bowl of blue pigment. He's painting symbols on the new stake's glyphs of maize water and stars, not because it makes the structure stronger, but because it honors the gods of growth. Work here is always part ritual, even if you're knee-deep in mud and mosquito bites. You take a break under a shade tree planted at the edge of an older chinampa. Next to you sits an old man weaving a calendar cord, a long piece of string with knots, feathers, and beads marking days for planting, resting, and offering. He explains slowly and patiently how each color represents a god, each bead a season. He doesn't need a sundial or clock. This cord is the planner. Fringe, but functional. He talks about the dry years, the floods, the years when the maize rotted on the stalk. You ask how they survived it. He shrugs. We build again. That's it. No drama, no doomsday rants, just mud hands and repetition. And repetition, you realize, is the secret. This empire didn't rise from grand temples or blood-soaked battles alone. It rose from thousands of daily acts of shaping mud, aligning trees, hauling water, and whispering thanks to unseen gods. It rose from workers who didn't need marble columns to feel proud, just straight rows and a strong crop. As night falls, the workers gather for a meal, steaming maize cakes, squash stew, and pulque in clay mugs. They sit in a circle, and you sit with them. There's laughter, stories. Someone makes a joke about a chinampa that floated away with a priest still praying on it. You pretend to laugh like you understand the punchline. And then the oldest worker turns to you, his eyes sharp. You want to build a floating city, he asks. You nod instinctively. He smiles. Then respect the mud. You're not sure if it's wisdom or a warning. Probably both. The fire crackles. The stars appear. You stretch your legs and stare into the dark water where the reflections of torchlight shimmer like molten gold. Tomorrow the work begins again. Someone will hammer new stakes. Someone will dredge another canal. And no one will complain. Because out here, the dream is built by hand. Daily. Quietly. With mud math and a little magic. Morning again. And this time it's loud. Not the soft rustle of crops or the hum of canal paddles real noise. Shouting, running feet, the slap of water against boats. You sit up quickly, nearly tipping your canoe, and realize the peaceful chinampa world you've been drifting through isn't always so serene. Today, you're hearing the pulse of a system under pressure. You step onto a nearby chinampa, where a cluster of farmers are already gathered in a semicircle around a priest, holding a bundle of chili stalks like a warning flag. He's angry. The gods, apparently, are displeased. You catch the word Tlaloc, again god of rain, and then Huitztli, meaning drought. Bad combo. Something's gone wrong with the water. You follow a group of farmers as they wade knee-deep into a narrow canal that should be gushing, but instead trickles lazily like a clogged gutter. It hasn't rained in days. The lake is unusually salty in this sector. And one man mutters that the southern dike system, the one built to separate fresh and brackish water, might be compromised. Here's a mainstream fact. The Aztecs had a massive hydraulic project called the Albaradón de Nezahualcóyotl, a dike that stretched for miles and kept Lake Texcoco's saline waters at bay, preserving the sweet water needed for farming. It was revolutionary, but it wasn't invincible, and today, you're watching its limits. Frustration buzzes like gnats. Farmers complain their amaranth wilted. Squash vines droop. Even the chili plants, the tough guys of the garden, are curling in on themselves like cranky toddlers. You try to offer your water gourd to help. One of them laughs and dumps it onto the soil. It's barely enough to darken the surface. And then comes the next issue: rumors of raids. A breathless messenger in jade earrings skids to a halt on the path, breath steaming in the morning chill. He's from a chinampa community farther west. They were hit during the night, not by warriors, but by desperate thieves, likely from neighboring tribes or starving city dwellers stealing maize and cutting saplings for fuel. Because here's the thing, the chinampas didn't just support the floating gardens. They supported the entire food supply of Tenochtitlan, a city with possibly 200,000 people, bigger than most European cities at the time. When things go wrong out here, the entire empire feels it. You hop into a canoe and follow a team of temple guards sent to investigate. They wear light armor-padded cotton jackets and carry obsidian-bladed weapons called macua huitl, gleaming and terrifying. As you reach the damaged chinampa, you see the wreckage, shredded crops, broken fences, and a shrine to the maize god smeared with mud. It's not war, but it feels like one. Historians still argue whether these raids were organized rebellions, acts of famine, or simple criminal desperation. There's no clear answer. But today, the line between sacred farm and vulnerable resource has blurred. And in times of trouble, even paradise needs guards. Back near the central plots, meetings are underway. You sit in on a council gathering elders, priests, and chinampa lords discussing how to manage the crisis. Someone proposes reinforcing the dikes. Another wants to ration the water. A third suggests offerings to Tlaloc, including maybe a human sacrifice. The room stills. You cough nervously into your tunic and pretend to admire the reed mats. And here's a quirky detail for you. In some cases, the Aztecs offered frogs as symbolic substitutes during minor drought rituals. You can't help but glance nervously at the next frog you see, wondering if it knows what kind of promotion it just got. The discussion heats up. A young priest proposes planting emergency crops, fast-growing greens and wild herbs that could supplement the normal harvest. You nod. Smart move. But then someone else points out that the festival calendar is tight and religious rituals demand certain offerings. You're stuck between a food shortage and a sacred duty. It's then you realize the true brilliance and brittleness of the system. Chinampas are incredibly productive when everything's going right. Water-flowing mud, rich calendar, aligned gods content. But they're also fragile. One drought, one invasion, one misstep in the dike's maintenance, and the entire web shudders. Still, the Aztecs were planners. They built redundancy into their agriculture. You're shown storage canoes, flat boats covered with tarps, packed with dried maize beans and chile hidden in reed shelters for emergencies. Like the world's earliest prepper stash, but sacred. You follow a group to one of these reed sheds. Inside, the air is warm and smells faintly of smoke and grain. Baskets are arranged in symmetrical lines. Some have painted lids marked with glyphs East Field Good Harvest Shared Plot. You open one and find tiny cakes of dried spirulina algae packed tightly and still edible. Probably. Someone jokes that this is the chinampa pantry, and you laugh along, though part of you realizes it's no joke. These backup supplies were what kept communities from tipping into collapse when nature turned mean. You leave the storage area and return to the open fields. The sun is hot now, and farmers are back at work scraping up mud, replanting damaged rows, reciting quick prayers between furrows. The raid is behind them, the drought still ahead. But the work doesn't stop. Because it can't. You pause beside a young boy pulling weeds. He looks up and says something in Nahuatl that roughly translates to, "We plant again tomorrow." You smile, not because it's hopeful, but because it's true. This is the quiet heroism of the chinampa world, not the temples or the ceremonies, but the resilience of people ankle-deep in mud who keep planting even when they don't know what comes next. As the sun sets and the sky turns copper, you paddle slowly back toward your sleeping spot. The canals are quieter now, the water still, but beneath the surface, the roots hold firm. Because even in crisis, these floating cities were designed to rise. You wake to birdsong and the sound of water slapping softly against the canoe. Morning dew beads on the paddle, the sky still pale with the last traces of night. But today, something feels off. You drift quietly past familiar chinampas, noticing things that didn't register before. There are flowers everywhere, not just in rows for harvesting or bunches tied to doorways. These are elaborate displays, garlands draped over trees, floating blossoms in the canal's bouquets. At every shrine, something's up. You dock near a particularly elegant chinampa, one of the noble plots, and climb out. It's larger than usual, bordered with sculpted stone rather than mud-packed reeds. A walkway of flat obsidian stones leads to a pavilion where incense coils lazily drift upward. The place smells like burning copal marigolds and freshly tilled earth. You're not in the farmer zone anymore. You're in the elite district. You're met by a man wearing a cloak woven with jade-colored thread. He offers a polite nod, then leads you down a corridor flanked by canals filled with pink lotus flowers and an occasional bored turtle. You try not to gawk, but it's impossible. The water is mirror-like, reflecting perfect rows of ornamental herbs, rare peppers, and exotic birds perching on carefully trained willows. It's not agriculture. It's a status symbol that photosynthesizes. Historians still debate whether these luxury chinampas were extensions of political power or just glorified gardens, but either way they were curated with obsessive detail. One even has an elevated platform with sunken clay bowls filled with colored sand arranged to mimic constellations. Why, no one knows. Possibly spiritual, possibly an ancient form of bragging. And then you hear laughter. Not just giggles, political laughter. The laughter of nobles sipping pulque while lounging beneath a reed pergola. You drift closer, trying not to look out of place with your mud-stained tunic and dried algae on your knees. You overhear snippets of conversation grain quotas, tribute shipments, priestly appointments, all the things that keep an empire's gears turning. And here's the kicker, it's happening on floating land. One noblewoman tosses flower petals into the canal absently, as she complains about a rival family taking too much fresh water for their chinampas. Another boasts of her husband's chinampa producing the largest chilies this side of the obsidian curtain. You stifle a laugh. Apparently, politics here is pedal deep and pepper sharp. Then a servant brings over a carved box. Inside, a rolled message, written on amate bark, the Aztec version of a high-stakes memo. You can't read the glyphs, but the tone is tense. After all, when you're growing your power from lake mud, everything is a negotiation. You follow a quiet path behind one noble plot, hoping for fresh air. But instead, you find a scene both stunning and strange, a chinampa devoted entirely to butterflies. Their enclosure is netted with maguey fibers, and flowers bloom inside like a riot of color. A priest sits cross-legged nearby, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. He speaks softly, as if sensing your presence. Transformation comes from floating. You blink. Not helpful, but poetic. Quirky tidbit. The Aztecs associated butterflies with the souls of warriors and noble dead. Some believed they returned to visit through these fragile winged creatures. Others saw them as messengers between realms. So yes, butterfly gardens as political flexes and spiritual hotspots. Welcome to Chinampa Life Deluxe Edition. But not everything in this floating beauty land is harmonious. As you pass by a set of servant quarters, you catch sight of someone burning old read documents, messages maybe, or personal logs. One slips free of the flames charred and curling in the air. You snatch it before it hits the canal. It's a map, a chinampa grid, certain plots marked with tiny obsidian dots. You hear footsteps and quickly tuck it away. Historians still argue whether plots like these were used for political manipulation, hidden grain stockpiles, secret priest appointments, maybe even blackmail. But you're starting to suspect that beneath the flower petals and ritual prayers, the mud holds more than just roots. It holds secrets. That suspicion deepens when you paddle out to a canal that's unusually quiet. Here the flowers are wild, the chinampas abandoned, crops strangled by weeds. At first, you think it's just disuse. Then you spotted a carved stone frog tipped over and cracked. The shrine nearby is scorched. This chinampa wasn't abandoned. It was erased. Why, who knows? A family that fell out of favor. A rival plot that grew too powerful. A failed harvest that got interpreted as divine punishment. Whatever the reason, no one speaks of it. You ask an old woman weaving reed mats nearby. She glances toward the overgrown plot shrugs and says, "Too many offerings. Not enough respect." You think about that as you drift back toward the noble quarters. Respect. In a system this delicate, where crops feed cities, where priests interpret rainfall, where power floats on layers of mud, and tradition respect isn't optional. It's currency. As the sun sets, the canals fill again with boats. Some carry produce. Others carry people dressed in finery, heading toward temples for evening rituals. You pass a flotilla of musicians with shell instruments and ocarinas, their notes skipping over the water like dragonflies. You lean back in your canoe, floating slowly, letting it all wash over you. The beauty, the tension, the flowers and the fire. Because here on the Chinampas, everything floats, crops, homes, gods and grudges. You close your eyes, the boat bobbing gently beneath you. Somewhere nearby, a noble's laughter rings out again. You wonder who he'll support at the next feast. Which canal will get blocked? Which chinampa will suddenly find itself cut off? And in the stillness, you realize politics floats too. And sometimes, it sinks. Your paddle slices the water like a whisper. The canal is wide here, unnaturally so, and strangely quiet. You've entered a place no Aztec dreamed of, but which their descendants came to fear, then resent, and finally could do nothing about. Because today you're floating alongside strangers, Europeans, and they're staring at these chinampas like they've landed on an alien planet. You're watching it happen through imagined eyes, the way history might replay on a sleepless night. It's 1519, and Hernán Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors have arrived at the lake's edge. After months of marching, burning, and sword swinging, they finally see it. Tenochtitlan, the city in the lake, glimmering like a dream temples. like teeth canals, like veins chinampas, stretching into the mist, like floating gardens of paradise. And they are utterly stunned. One of Cortez's men, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, would later write that it was like the enchantments, on account of the great towers and quays and buildings rising from the water. Translation: they couldn't believe their eyes. You imagine their approach, horses balking at the causeways, armor clinking, boots heavy with mud. These were men who'd grown up with wooden carts and stone farmhouses, who barely washed their hands. And suddenly, they're face to face with a hydraulic civilization that rivals anything they'd ever seen. They ride along the sacred causeways, the raised roads that stretch across the lake like arms from the mainland to the city center. Each causeway flanked by shimmering canals, each canal flanked by chinampas. You can almost hear the hoofbeats slow the confusion mounting. What kind of people live on water like this? And more importantly, how do we conquer them? You drift past one of the Spanish camps awkwardly erected on dry reclaimed patches near the lake edge. They're miserable. The ground is too soft, their boots rot in the wet, and their maps are useless. The chinampa system is too fluid, too foreign, too organized for their rigid European tactics. They don't understand how the canals work, how the farmers move silently at night by canoe, how the plots regenerate themselves, how the lake is not just a moat, but a circulatory system. They don't get it, but they still destroy it. You watch as a small group of Spaniards tries to take a chinampa by force. They stumble into mud up to their waists, flailing. An old woman in a canoe hits one of them with her paddle and rows off laughing. It's darkly funny but short-lived, because soon enough Cortez figures it out. He allies with enemies of the Aztecs, cuts off supply lines, and slowly chokes the city into submission. And part of that includes targeting the chinampas, set fire to them, drain them, poison the canals, convert the farmland into flat European-style plots that never quite work the same. And here's the kicker: they couldn't replicate it. The Spaniards tried to impose their system's wheat fields, grazing, livestock grid planning, but they never matched the efficiency of the floating gardens. Historians still marvel at how quickly the productivity of the valley dropped after conquest. The new rulers didn't just ignore the chinampas, they undermined them. Still, some survived, not because the conquerors spared them, but because they were simply too resilient, too deep in the mud, too stubborn in their roots. Some communities kept farming on them in secret, passing down knowledge like contraband recipes, whispering to the soil when no one was listening. You float toward the southern end of the valley now into a place called Xochimilco Flower Field Place. It's quieter here, slower. The chinampas still exist, sort of. Boats glide through narrow canals. Tourists sip cold drinks. And if you squint just right, you can almost forget what was lost. But even here, beneath the bright paint and mariachis, you feel the tension. Modern drainage systems have shrunk the lake. Pollution creeps in. Urban sprawl pushes from all sides. And yet, the chinampas, those stubborn floating farms, are still here. Planting. Replanting. Refusing to disappear. You meet a farmer. Not ancient, not noble, just a man with calloused hands and a smartphone in his pocket. He's planting marigolds for Dia de los Muertos, the same flower that once guided souls through ritual canals. He shows you how he still layers his soil, lake muck reeds, compost. He still uses ahuejote trees, still rows his canoe with the same rhythm. You ask him why he keeps doing it. He shrugs, then smiles because it works. You glance across the chinampa. Rows of maize shimmer in the wind. Water reflects a sky painted with late afternoon gold. The past isn't just beneath your feet. It is your feet. It holds you up. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the lake bed, the echoes of Cortez' horses fade into silence. The garden floats. Still. Evening again, and now the lake is a mirror. Dark still and infinite. You drift slowly past willow shadows and gentle ripples, as if being carried by time itself. The chinampas, barely visible in the dusk, seem to hum with quiet persistence. They've told you their secrets. They've shown you their roots, their rituals, their resilience. And now, as you begin to trace the edges of this floating world, one last time, the question lingers, what still survives? You're in modern-day Xochimilco, the southern remnant of Lake Texcoco's watery empire. And if you didn't know better, you might think you'd stumbled into a floating festival. There are brightly painted trajineras, those wide, colorful boats carrying laughing families and music that bounces off the water like falling petals. But look a little closer, and you'll see it. Between the tourist barges and flower arches, farmers in narrow canoes still tending their plots. The real chinampa life, still alive, still working. You speak with an old woman who's been growing quilites, a kind of wild edible green, on the same patch her grandmother once planted. She laughs when you ask her if it's hard work. Of course it's hard, she says, gently whacking you with a muddy trowel. But the land remembers, even when the city forgets. And the city has tried to forget. After the conquest, and especially in the modern era, urban expansion pushed hard against these water gardens. Mexico City sprawled outward, paving over ancient canals, draining what was left of the lake, and letting concrete smother memory. But the chinampas refused to go quietly. They're still here, 7 square kilometers of them by some estimates. That's about 2.7 square miles for those measuring in American nostalgia. But it's not easy. Pollution creeps in through broken pipes. Invasive species like tilapia threaten the native axolotls, the adorable salamanders that once swam alongside floating crops. Illegal dumping lacks enforcement and neglect threaten to turn these sacred gardens into soggy ruins. Yet, the people remain. A new generation has risen: urban farmers, eco-activists, cultural stewards, trying to reclaim the roots. You meet one, a young man in a faded university hoodie and boots caked in lake sludge. He runs an educational program where school kids come out to plant on restored chinampas. Most of them think food comes from a plastic bag, he jokes. I make them dig first. They remember mud better than lectures. You smile. Of course they do. And the chinampas themselves, resilient, brilliant, bizarre, still work. In fact, studies have shown they outperform many modern farming methods in yield and sustainability. With the right care, 1 hectare, about 5 acres, can produce multiple tons of food annually. All organic, all local, all floating. There's talk now of reviving them on a wider scale, not just as tourist nostalgia, but as a model for urban agriculture in the age of climate change. After all, these gardens were made for wet environments, for shifting waters, for adapting to nature, not bulldozing over it. In a world increasingly anxious about droughts, floods, and food shortages, maybe the Aztecs were onto something. Historians still debate how much of the original system could be revived, and whether the cultural context, rituals, language, sacred calendars must accompany the farming methods to make it truly authentic. But that's the thing about living traditions. They float too. You drift slowly, now your canoe carried by a lazy current. On either side, young willows bend in greeting. Somewhere in the dark, a frog croaks. Somewhere else, a reed flute plays a soft, slow tune. The water shimmers under a rising moon. And you remember everything. The farmers who layered mud like sacred recipes. The priests whispering to maize gods beneath obsidian skies. The warriors guarding squash fields. The nobles tossing petals into the canals, pretending power floats. The conquistadors gawking, misunderstanding, then breaking what they couldn't comprehend. And still, the roots held on. You pass a patch of amaranth glowing deep crimson under moonlight. You reach out and run your fingers across its leaves. It's the same plant grown 500 years ago in the same lake bed. You're touching living history, not just preserved, but planted, fed, and harvested. You close your eyes, and the chinampa holds you, like a cradle, like a memory, like an answer we nearly forgot. Now slow your breathing just a little. Let the air settle around you, warm and soft, like the still water of a midnight canal. Let the sound of gentle paddles and distant frogs fade into the background. There's no more history to chase tonight, no more mud to shovel, no more ancient mysteries to untangle. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now, you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sweet dreams.